Welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I am Amit Pal, Communications Director here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is a national association of freethinkers working to keep state and church separate. We're broadcasting from the friendly atheist Stephen Yuill studio here at the national office in Madison, Wisconsin.
I'm Andrew Seidel, a constitutional attorney and FFRF's Director of Strategic Response. This is Ask an Atheist, and we really want you to ask your questions. Feel free to post those comments or questions right here on the Facebook page or by sending them to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
Well, today we are actually going to get a report from Annie Laurie on her trip last week to Washington, D.C., where she went to a really large-scale State Department event, and she also did some lobbying. And we'll also hear from Andrew, who also did lobbying in D.C. and helped represent FFRF at its reception for the Congressional Free Thought Caucus last week. And perhaps Andrew can tell us a bit about that, which has actually its membership in Congress in double digits now. And Andrew's also going to talk about the State Department's sinister new creation of the Commission on Unalienable Rights. Yes, you heard that right. Commission on Unalienable Rights, which was announced just last week. But before we get into that, we want to highlight a story that came across the web just yesterday, which is of special interest to us, based here in Madison, Wisconsin. As you may have heard, right here in Madison, Wisconsin, just last Friday, the local utility had some trouble with the electrical transformers, and here's what happened.
Jesus Christ.
So in total, 2 transformers blew up. It was pretty dramatic. In reality, only about 15,000 people lost power, and 99% of that power was restored at noon the same day.
But that didn't stop some of the religious types from attributing this totally human-made incident to a quote-unquote higher power. Courtesy of our friend Hemant Mehta's Friendly Atheist blog, we learned that God blew up the transformers because of his disapproval of legal abortion.
Yes, now it all makes sense. And so how ridiculous. But by the way, even though our headquarters at the Freedom from Religion Foundation are located directly between the 2 substations that caught fire, guess what? Our office did not lose power. So someone was looking out for us, apparently.
It's it's amazing that God doesn't just stop the things he's so disapproving of instead of making...
very indirect way.
Yeah.
It was a hardship, though, because it was a particularly hot day. So we had air conditioning at FFRF. And so, very silly story.
Very silly story. And just to provide a bit of context, Governor Tony Evers, newly elected, vetoed a number of anti-abortion bills recently. So that's the background from which this is coming, but it doesn't make it any less ridiculous for them to assert that. So, but now into the DC trip. And so what was the reason for your trip, Annie Laurie?
So I got a surprise invitation one day in my email from the State Department official inviting me to attend they call it the Ministerial to Advance Religious Liberty that is put on by the State Department. And it's the 2nd annual event in Washington, D.C., and it's kind of coordinated with the annual report on religious persecution worldwide that the Bush administration required the State Department to do, and which doesn't always do things that are necessarily wrong, but they're usually nuanced in favor of, religion is being persecuted, especially Christianity.
Yes.
And then I was asked, who else should I invite? And I told the State Department person about Bona Ahmed, who has, I don't know if she's been on Ask an Atheist. I think she will be in 2 weeks here. But she's an American citizen who's born in Bangladesh, and her husband, Avajit Roy, and she were set upon by people who were actually from Al-Qaeda. Islamist terrorists with machetes when they were in downtown Dhaka in 2015, and I think many people know the story. Avajit was hacked to death on the streets. He bled to death. Bona was almost killed and recovered, but very serious injuries, minus a thumb, lots of migraines, lots of other issues from this critical attack. She nearly died. So they were set upon because they were atheists. And al-Qaeda wanted to kill Abhijit Roy, her husband, because he had written a book on atheism in Bangladesh and also a pro-gay rights book, the first one in Bangladesh, explaining homosexuality. So they had targeted him. So I thought she would be a very appropriate survivor of religious persecution, and so they did invite her. But unfortunately, I think she was treated like a second-class citizen, and I can go into that in a little bit. But there were other representatives from secular groups, Robin Blumner, who's CEO and president of Center for Inquiry. Some American atheist representatives were there, somebody from American Humanist Association, and also from Humanist International, formerly called International Humanist Ethical Union.
IHEU.
Yes. IHEU changed their name in the last year. But they were actually invited to be in the audience last year, and it was because they saw that there was no reference to non-believers. They wrote a letter of complaint, and I think that's part of the reason why they made sure to have some representatives in the audience. However, Bona and one representative from Humanist International were the only non-believing presenters, only openly secular presenters there. And so as a result, while there were 1,000 people there, she only spoke to an audience of 35. And we can get to a little bit more about that. But there were a number of famous survivors of religious persecution, including the rabbi from the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, an imam who prayed a lot from Christchurch, where there had been the attack.
Christchurch in New Zealand,
in New
of course.
Zealand. And one of the persons who impressed me the most was the son of the Pakistani governor who was killed for supporting
Salman Taseer was the name of the governor.
Yes. And I think we have this is Salman. This is the son of Salman Taseer. This is Sean Taseer, and he gave a very wonderful speech. Again, he didn't give it to the full plenary, about 300 people saw it, which was all against blasphemy. And he was pointing out that Azia Bibi, who was the illiterate Christian woman who was falsely accused of blasphemy for 9 years, and it became a big worldwide issue, and she was finally released and is in Canada. He said there are, she's a poster child, but there are 199 other Azia Bibis who are in detention. And Pakistan has to get rid of its blasphemy law, and we have to get rid of it worldwide. And he challenged the MC of the event, who is the ambassador of religious liberty.
Ambassador at large for international religious freedom.
Andrew and I were talking about that. Full time.
Now his name's
Sam Brownback.
Sam Brownback, who's
former governor of Kansas and senator from Kansas.
Roman Catholic, arch conservative.
Yes,
he was the MC of the event. So this son of the Pakistani governor who'd been assassinated challenged him to talk to the head of Pakistan, who was here this weekend and just met with Trump.
Imran Khan, the Pakistani prime minister.
Yeah, about the blasphemy issue. And then Brownback came back on and just said these empty, gratuitous, he didn't
address the issue at all.
No, and I can't imagine he addressed it in the last few days.
Certainly didn't take up the challenge.
No, but that was one of the other strong voices for secularism about the only that we got. But there was the very interesting address by Nadia Murad.
Yes.
And you might want to talk about her a little bit before we show the clip.
So Nadia Murad is basically a Yazidi who the ISIS targeted that community in northern Iraq for being supposedly devil worshippers in their weird kind of theology, and enslaved and raped countless Yazidi women. So she escaped from Iraq and highlighted their story, and actually has gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. So she was taken to meet President Trump, and we can see
along with many of the others.
Others.
And not Bona.
And we can see his reaction in this clip here.
This happened to me. They killed my mom, my 6th brother. They left behind them.
Where are they now?
They killed them. They are in the mass graves in Sinjar, and I'm still fighting just to live in safe. Please do something, and it's not about one family.
I know the area very well you're talking about.
It's about 500,000. It's about the whole community.
Okay, we're going to look into it very
Thank you so
strongly.
much.
Thank you.
Mr.
And you had the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
But
They gave it to you for what reason? You can explain.
for what reason? For that After all this happened to me, I didn't give up. I make it clear to everyone that ISIS raped thousands of Yazidi women. This one was first time the woman from Iraq, she get out and spoke about what happened to them.
Oh, really?
And
Is that right?
It's
That's the
first time, and it's.
So you escaped?
I escaped, but I don't have my freedom yet
understand.
because.
Yeah, and actually, this clip started a little late. She already said her family was all dead.
Yes, yes.
And then he said to her, "Where's your family?"
So he
wasn't
just
even
shows,
listening.
displays, several inabilities: the inability to be briefed, to read his briefings, to empathize, to listen.
That's the big one, just no empathy
Yes,
at all.
yes,
But
absolutely.
she did get listened to. She had to talk about being. She was repeatedly raped. I mean,
Yes.
she was a sex slave,
Yes.
and she had to get up on that stage and.
So you did listen to her speech?
Oh yes, she was
Okay.
through the full plenary. 1,000
Okay,
people
okay.
heard her, and of course she got a standing ovation.
Sure.
And then they took a bunch of the survivors of religious persecution to the White House.
Sure.
Bona was invited, but she and an Afghan woman were not taken with everyone else. They just were left in a room and nobody really came in, and then they
Wow.
came in and apologized. So again, there was this second-class citizenship going on.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of it, I should have pointed out that Mike Pompeo, who's the Secretary of State, it's
Sure.
his event. He opened it.
Yes.
And it was all about what their theme, and Brownback's theme was,
Yes.
religious liberty is a God-given right.
Yeah.
Over and over and over, this is what we kept hearing. So that this was their party line, and it was sort of a setup for the coming announcement of the Unalienable Rights Commission that was announced on Thursday. This meeting started Monday. It was not open to the media or all of us Monday, but it was Tuesday and Wednesday was the full meeting. And then Thursday, they had a few more things, and that's when Pompeo announced the Unalienable Rights. So it's all connected. And so but Bona did speak to 35 people and did say how, she didn't say it was offensive, but how excluded she felt. And those of us who are not religious, the persecution of those of us who are not religious was not really fully understood. It was not really part of the event. Every once in a while, Brownback would make a little tiny postscript like, people live all faiths and no faith. They've
Sure.
obviously been told, say this once in a while. But it was a postscript.
So they kind of left out, essentially, the fact that non-believers are also persecuted.
Yeah,
around the
and
world.
often more persecuted.
And it's frustrating, too, because if this is about religious liberty, the only true guarantee for religious liberty is a secular government. There's no freedom of
Yes.
religion without a government
No
that's
doubt.
free from religion.
Yes,
So,
and as my mother, the founder of FFRF, would always say, there can be no religious liberty without the freedom to dissent. So we didn't see much dissent. I mean, they understood there were people from all these minority groups. It wasn't only Christians. But there was a definite, they brought in somebody from Poland, which is practically a fascist state,
Yeah.
and brought in somebody from Hungary, same thing.
Yes.
They are persecuting people
Yeah.
based on religion. In Poland, it's
Yes.
all Roman Catholic. They've made abortion illegal, and it's a scary place to see this happen. And they had to work really hard, as Bona said. She's lived a lot in Europe, to find people in the European Union with
Yeah.
that kind of point of view.
Yeah.
So there were other things going on that were obviously for political reasons. I can't go into all of it right here, but made me very uncomfortable.
yeah, it's so frustrating that
Yeah.
if you're trying to put forth the ideal of religious freedom, you need strong voices for secular government there talking. And, it
And of
sounds
course,
like
they don't get it.
And,
Yeah.
And I would also say that it was intimidating because 70 to 80% of the participants in the audience were men.
Yeah,
They were
wow.
from all over the world, and
Yeah.
a lot of them were wearing black gowns.
Wow.
Not all from Catholic. There would, be different religions
sure.
wearing them. There was an imam who got up and talked. I was thinking, wow, he really is tolerant. He went on and on about trying to make inroads and meet with people from different religions, and then at the very end, but this is what we must not have any derogatory language about religion.
Yeah.
That must not be allowed. That has to be
Yeah,
outlawed.
yeah, yeah.
Right after the guy from Pakistan got up talking about blasphemy.
Yeah.
So, unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at least you got to see some interesting people,
Oh,
and
yes.
and you engaged in some lobbying too. You want to tell us a bit about that?
Yes, and actually we had some interesting conversations. I had some interesting conversations. You're supposed to mingle at this event.
Sure.
And sometimes people's faces would fall when I would tell them I'm with the
Yeah,
Freedom From Religion
I
Foundation, and
wouldn't
we
be
work for
surprised.
separation of church and state, and our
Yeah.
members are atheists and agnostics.
Yeah.
And sometimes they would light up.
Oh, okay.
So we exchanged some business cards and made
Sure.
some contacts. I guess there's a picture of me speaking. Oh, this is at the reception. So then that night, last Wednesday, FFRF hosted a reception on Capitol Hill
Nice.
on behalf of the Free Thought Congressional Caucus.
Sure.
So this is at the House of Representatives in the Cannon Building.
Yes, and not my favorite picture, but and there's Bona Ahmed, who was our guest of honor, and in between us is Representative Jared Huffman,
yes.
who is the only out agnostic, non-religious member of Congress and a co-founder of the new Free Thought Congressional Caucus.
And somebody we honored at our convention last year.
And Bona gave a very moving talk directed just at him, and then he got up and gave a wonderful talk, saw his notes. He obviously wrote it himself. There's Andrew. There were a bunch of people invited from many secular organizations. You can see Sarah Hayder from Ex-Muslims of North America, and on the other side is Debbie Allen, who's Executive Director of the Secular Coalition for America, in between Huffman. We had a full house. You thought about 70 people.
Yeah, I think
and
about 70 people
The
showed
room
up
only
total.
holds about 60.
Yeah.
Very good food. There was a rainstorm, but a good turnout. We also invited, Mark Dan is our new lobbyist, and he invited a number of religious liberty groups that are truly about religious liberty. I don't know if they all made them, like the Joint Baptist Committee. And then the next day, Bona and I, Mark, did a full day of lobbying, and there we are with my senator, U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin. And Tammy was the first open lesbian to be elected to any state legislature, including she was in Wisconsin, and then the first open lesbian to be elected as a U.S. rep, and then the first lesbian to be elected as a U.S. senator.
Which reminds me, Annie Laurie, your photo with Senator Baldwin, that the two other members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus that I have to give a shout out to, since I feel a personal connection to them. One is our member of Congress,
That's right.
Mark Pocan,
Yes.
from the Madison area. And the other is Pramila Jayapal from Washington, who is a fellow Indian American. And I'm so happy and proud that she's
Yes.
a member of the Free Thought Caucus too. So it's great. Yes, and it's great that, that the membership of that caucus is expanding.
And we did interview, you and I, Andrew, interviewed Jared Huffman for an upcoming episode of Free Thought Matters, which is our formal TV show that's going back on the air in September.
It's an exciting interview. I'm really...
Yeah, so it's
People are gonna be
September
blown away
1st
by it.
in 12 or 13 cities, major cities, and you can go to our website, look under the news link for Free Thought Matters, and you can see if it's in your city. It's like New York, Sacramento,
I think this could make national news.
Phoenix, LA, Chicago, Madison, around the country.
It's a really good interview. I
it's-
think it could make national news on this one.
Well,
Some of the
I
things
don't know,
said,
but he
we'll
was
see.
really good. He was really good. He was really good speaking, and we have a great advocate for separation of church and state. And not everyone who's on the Free Thought Caucus has to be or is a non-believer. It's supposed to be that they understand we have rights, and they also work for separation of church and state.
Talking of the Free Thought Caucus, don't we have another member, and that's Congressman Jamie Raskin?
Jamie Raskin.
Yeah, he's slated to be on Free Thought Matter sometime soon, hopefully.
Yes, and
Yeah.
also he will be giving us a video welcome at our 42nd annual convention in Madison,
Wonderful.
which is October 18th and 19th. And because he's on the Judiciary Committee, he was too busy to come in
It's a
person.
little busy right now.
Yeah, it's really busy here today, for example. But he's getting our statuette of Clarence Darrow. He's getting the second such Clarence Darrow Award for his standing up for reason and against nonsense. And so he'll be giving a video. He wasn't able to make the reception, but and then I guess that kind of covers what we did. But would you want to talk about?
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, Mark Dan is our first Director of Governmental Affairs, our first person based in DC, our first staffer based in DC, and you and he have been engaging in a lot of lobbying work. Could you please tell us a bit about that?
We should take a moment to sing Mark's praises here,
Yes.
because he helped set up this event with Representative Huffman and Bona, and then he and I on Tuesday met with most of the members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. On Wednesday, we met with Representative Huffman's office in the morning before the event in the evening. I mean, he's done a phenomenal job of really elevating FFRF.
In just a couple of months.
Yeah, I don't even know. Is it even? Yeah, he seems like he's done an awful lot.
And a wonderful tour guide. He set up all of the lobbying that we did the next day. And I should say we lobbied against the ban, the Muslim ban, or the ban based on religion.
Yes.
Pointing out that it's encompassing so-called apostates and who are endangered in Islamist nations who can't get out.
Well, and this is one of the things that you should talk about that you and Bona are helping to do, is rescue a lot of these bloggers and people who are persecuted in foreign countries.
Yeah.
And you're doing it with Robin Blumner as well.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Non-Belief Relief Committee have been giving stipends and working with Bona Ahmed and international groups that have vetted the legitimacy of the need to get out, and it's a growing problem.
So if anybody's really
Endangered.
credentialed to speak to it, it's you and Bona. I mean, and so I think it was probably a pretty effective round of meetings that you had.
Well, we tried to connect the dots for them about the ban and the plight of non-believers, around the world. And I also visited an office of one of the women the Iraqi woman who was brought in by the State Department, and then they came to us and to Center for Inquiry for funding. And we've maxed out what we can do for this individual, but I did go and visit her U.S. representative and got some help for her while she waits for her asylum case. At least I hope there'll be some help. They gave us some tips. So that is one of the things that U.S. representatives do. They do constituency services.
Yes,
and
of
so
course.
I thought that was very
It's
important, even though Duncan Hunter is a very Christian right individual.
From California,
This
interestingly enough.
individual got
Having a
into
hard
trouble in Iraq because she said she wasn't a Muslim, so I think there was some understanding.
Yes. So should we move on to questions, or is
No,
there anything that...
we haven't talked about the unalienable rights.
Oh, yes, of course, Andrew. So, Unalienable Rights. Could we start with the title, Andrew, and as to why it is that?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, Annie Laurie, you mentioned how Secretary Mike Pompeo and Ambassador Brownback, they keep talking about religious liberty as this God-given right. And on Thursday, you said, they made this formal announcement about the Commission on Inalienable Rights. We actually heard about that back in June.
Yes.
We heard some whispers about it through some of our contacts. So the Strategic Response Team immediately submitted a FOIA request to the Department of State. We did that on June 6th. So we're awaiting records on that right now, and that will also
And if
be
I may
able to...
add, we were very much ahead of the curve.
Oh, way ahead of the curve. Yeah. And I mean, if we don't get we'll be one of the first to get the records, and if we don't, we'll also be one of the first to sue out the gate over this.
Yeah.
So, but the first thing that really everybody needs to understand is that Mike Pompeo is a Christian nationalist. I mean, he is out to use his public office to promote his personal religion and to turn the United States into a Christian nation based on Judeo-Christian principles. And here he is speaking at the God and Country rally at the Summit Church in Wichita, Kansas on June 28th, 2015.
Pastor Joe went on to make clear that America had worshipped other gods and called it multiculturalism, and that we'd endorsed perversion and called it an alternative lifestyle. It is an awesome honor to be standing here today in front of the United States flag and a cross. We've watched government try to rip faith from our schools and diminish the education that comes as a result of God not being in that classroom. I've been called a tool of the Jews, but it will never dissuade me, and I hope none of you, from acting out in the most important fundamental way, is proclaiming that this is an exceptional nation and that Jesus Christ is my Savior. For the first time in the history of this country, the federal government will now take away from every state, including Kansas, the right to determine what 70% of all Kansans wanted: marriage between one man and one woman. And this won't be the end of their demands, I can assure you. It's just at the beginning. They will come to places like Summit Church and attempt to impose burdens that are against your Christian's belief. And I can stare out in this audience today and know that you will never let that happen. You know, that's what the 4th of July is about. We'll get a chance to recognize the greatness of the founders of our country, the Judeo-Christian nation upon which they framed all that we have built on in the last 239 years. We will continue to fight these battles. It is a never-ending struggle until that moment Pastor Fox spoke about, until the rapture.
So to quote the title of a recent classic, a socio-political classic, what's the matter with Kansas? I mean, you know, Brownback is from there and Pompeo is from there, and now they're controlling the agenda of the State Department and religious freedom. So, Andrew, could you fill us in on the commission and what these folks are up to?
I mean, now that he's in the State Department, he's created this commission, and it's really important for people to understand what it's about.
Yeah.
You know, he went on to say, so that was 2015.
Yes.
But now, in talking about the commission, he said that the distinctive mark of Western civilization is the belief in the inherent worth of human beings, with the attendant respect for God-authored rights and liberties. So he said that in May. That was one of the reasons we were so quick to jump on this. He's conflating God-given rights and human rights, and that seems to be the goal of the commission. Another State Department official said, "We believe by our nature as human beings that we enjoy unalienable rights, and our founders believed in God, saying that the founders believed that God gave us these inalienable rights and that they could not be taken away by man."
They said that at the conference.
So this was the party line. They kept saying something similar. And I think we have a clip of Pompeo saying something similar at the Ministerial.
You can be sure that the United States will be out in front defending the God-given, unalienable right of all human beings to worship as they choose. And I know, and I hope, that you will all stand with us. I hope good people everywhere will see that our movement is just getting started. I hope, too, they see the ever-increasing enthusiasm all throughout the world to defend religious freedom. And when they do, I'm sure that the next ministerial will be even bigger than this one. Thank you all for coming. God bless your work. God bless the United States of America, and may the good Lord bless all of you as well. Thank you.
As you can imagine, that's how it started. So we kind of knew what we were in for.
May the good Lord bless. I had an ecumenical conference.
And then Brownback was on next, full of his also religious liberty is a God-given right. And so it was, you know, a very strange mix when you know that they really don't believe in religious
Christian
liberty.
nationalism, Andrew and Annie Laurie, front and center as part of the foreign policy agenda is unprecedented. Correct me if I'm wrong, even the Bush administration didn't do this, to this extent at least.
I think you're probably right. And when a rapture-hungry end-times Christian starts talking about God-given rights, you know somebody's rights are about to be trampled. And if you look at what he was saying in that church in 2015 and what he was saying at the Ministerial, to me there's very little difference.
Yeah.
You know, the goal of defining these God-given rights, it's really to redefine what we understand as human rights in light of that Christian nationalism. It's to make it so that they can take away the rights of gay people to marry, for instance. I mean, it's very clear, I think, if you watch these in parallel, what they are trying to do. They're not trying to hide the ball at all here.
But they're happy to work with other theocracies, other theocratic rulers.
Sure.
So, you know, Muslim majority, fine.
Yeah.
You know, it was such a
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
famously,
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, infamously.
It was such a, I don't know if there was anybody there from Saudi Arabia. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but it was such a, you know, like whitewashing the whole agenda.
Sure.
And what they thought, it's fine to have a theocracy so long as there's minority rights for the other religions. That's kind of was the message.
And it's critical that we distinguish between human rights and God-given rights, because God-given rights can be taken away by men who claim to speak for God. God-given rights are incredibly weak and fragile. They depend on geography. You know, do you live in Iran or do you live in India or in Indiana? They depend on who is claiming to speak for God's will. And the fact that one of these preachers, Pompeo, was standing up there in the pulpit, could say, God says you as an LGBTQ person do not have a right to marry, is what they are going for. That is the end game here. It's not that difficult to figure out.
Whenever a governmental official starts thinking that they have a pipeline to a divinity, watch out.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what the founders, the framers of the U.S. Constitution did not say they had. They were the first among nations not to claim they had a pipeline to a divinity, in adopting this godless constitution. And then here we have these kinds of public officials talking about liberty as a God-given right. And you're absolutely right. If God can give that liberty, then their God can take it away.
Sure.
Or from select people. So it's a very frightening notion.
And before we get to the questions, we should mention that FFRF signed on to a letter this week.
Yes.
430 other organizations signed on to demanding that the State Department dissolve this commission, because it is very clear that the goal is not to re-examine human rights. As they said.
Hundreds of organizations and individuals, ACLU, Amnesty International, us, faith-based groups, just a whole array, and then activists, former government officials, including
Scholars,
Susan Rice, who was a national security advisor in the Obama administration, exactly, scholars. So it's an impressive range of groups and individuals, but I'm not holding my breath for any sort of response from the Trump administration.
And the central thing that everybody needs to understand really is the goal is not to re-examine human rights, which is what they say. It is to redefine rights as God-given rights, so that then it can then take them away. That is the plan here.
Well, have these public officials never read the U.S. Constitution? And I really sincerely doubt they have.
Yeah.
They have no idea. They just they're making up a myth about what they think, as your founding myth, as your book says, Andrew, about they're trying to rewrite history and cast us as a theocracy, or at least based on God, which, this is one of the problems with the motto, "In God We Trust." And I just got a call from Associated Press today about the fact that South Dakota's law has gone into effect, that you have to post "In God We Trust." We did do action alerts about that. That's part of the Project Blitz, aimed at states to pass theocratic legislation. But that motto has done so much harm.
It has.
Generations have grown up thinking, "In God We Trust" is our motto, so we must have a government based on God.
Yeah, and courts use it to uphold decisions that erode the wall of separation as well.
Well, we know that President Trump is incapable possibly of reading anything, including the U.S. Constitution. But we have to now perhaps get down to reading the questions that he...
Let's just add, he certainly doesn't understand what Article 2 says.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Absolutely. So let me read the questions that we've gotten from folks who have tuned into our show. And we have a number of questions. So Thomas Pangler asks, any chance this commission, the Commission on Unalienable Rights, could supply a reason why imaginary gods should be involved in our secular government? Very good question.
Can they supply a reason why imaginary gods? I think that, but again, that really does get to this sinister sort of unspoken goal that we are trying to expose here. It is a way to backdoor theology and theocracy into our government by redefining human rights as these God-given rights, because then you can say, well, the Bible doesn't give you those rights, so you do not have the right to marry.
If you're gay.
Yeah, if you're gay, and it's not going to stop there too if they are successful with this. We talked about this a lot when we were talking about the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. But for instance, if your religion allows you to discriminate against a gay couple, it allows you to discriminate against an interracial couple.
Yes.
And if your religion allows you to say that gay people don't have rights, it also allows you to say that an interracial couple may not. It's very, very clear what they are trying to do.
Or maybe an unwed mother doesn't have rights. Yeah. And also, I would suspect that we're going to see that conceptuses have unalienable rights. We're going to start talking about, whenever you hear that word life, equating fertilized egg with the rights of the individual woman who is pregnant against her will.
You're absolutely right. The children in cages don't, though.
No.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Yeah, and that was another thing that I think colored the whole procedure last week, knowing what was going on in the camps.
That's grim. So we've touched a bit upon this, but Rodney Nolan asks, isn't it supposed to be inalienable and not unalienable? Could you both please shed some light on that?
So they're both real words. They mean the same thing. Unalienable is what it says in the printed text of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson, in his initial drafts, wrote inalienable.
And I think Jefferson was right.
And
I think it sounds better.
And if you care about the drafting process or a nerd about this stuff like I am, it's probably likely that Adams, who sort of oversaw the printing of the Declaration, and in his handwritten notes it says unalienable, it's likely that he probably changed the I to a U.
Oh, interesting.
So, I mean,
And then that word is a bit archaic now, which is why I think people are
Yes.
just so thrown off and confused about why they're using that word, especially in the title of a commission.
and if you hear both, it's neither one's really wrong.
Yeah.
And interviews that I do, at least with, I did an interview with Fox Radio recently. I forget the national host. All he wanted to do was talk about the Declaration of Independence. They misread the Declaration of Independence because it mentions Creator or Providence, 4 times or so?
There's 4 different references to it.
Nature's God.
The laws of nature and of nature's God, their creator, supreme judge of the world, and divine providence.
And of course, Jefferson was a deist. And in this classical sense of the Enlightenment, which is what I told this host. And, we got nowhere because he wants to turn Jefferson into, a theocrat, basically, because they want to pretend that the Declaration of Independence is on the same par as the Constitution.
Yeah.
Well, and since we're nerding out about the drafting of the Declaration, the only one that Jefferson, of those 4 mentions that Jefferson included in the original, was the laws of nature and of nature's God. Their creator, not our creator, their creator, which is a significant difference, was added by Franklin and/or Adams when they got together with Jefferson. And then the final 2, divine providence and supreme judge of the world, were added at the very, very, very end.
Yeah, Supreme Judge of the World does not sound like Jefferson.
No, and that's almost certainly from Locke. And we know that Jefferson thought that they mangled, I believe was the word he used, his declaration with
And of
those
course, they also
additions.
took out the part where he was going to ban slavery.
Yeah.
Which was very unfortunate.
Well, condemning
Condemn
the
it.
Christian king for
Yeah,
the slave
slavery.
trade. And I do go over all of those in the
Sure,
book, every one of the
sure,
references,
sure.
so you can see what it was.
Sure.
But anyway, the Declaration of Independence is based on the consent of the governed, which is supremely anti-biblical.
Sure.
But so we are going to get a huge amount of propaganda about all of this twisting of the Declaration
Sure.
of Independence. So we're going to have to get prepared for
Certainly.
debunking all of this stuff.
Certainly. So moving from the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence to another really significant, a bit more recent document, Aldous Brown has a very important question. Does this mean, as in the Ministerial and the Commission on Unalienable Rights, that like the Paris Climate Agreement, we are going to withdraw from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Are we going to ignore them as a common standard of achievements for all peoples and all nations?
Well, that's a very good
Very
question.
good question, yeah.
I have to say that they did talk about Brownback and other representatives at the State Department Ministerial did talk about the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So they did mention it repeatedly.
Oh, okay.
So at least they knew they had to give it some lip service.
Yes.
Well, but they were talking about the re-examination of human rights. They've been talking about re-examining them in light of that declaration too. So I think there's a very
Yeah.
good chance that in the future we see the U.S. condemn, withdraw something before.
Or ignore it.
But they did not do that at this ministerial.
Sure. I love our questions today, really profound and really scholarly. Joanna Hines asks, what do you think Pompeo's agenda really is with this commission? Does he want to rewrite the Bill of Rights?
Yeah, I mean, I really think it is a way to backdoor Christian nationalism, and there's even it's even possibly an attempt not just to do it here. I mean, this is the State Department. We are talking about international law, the Universal Declaration of Human. It may be an attempt to backdoor Christian nationalism to, maybe we'll call it Christian globalism, to make it international as well.
Well, whenever the Republicans, I mean, we are a nonpartisan group, but it is a fact that whenever we have Republican presidents, they are voting wrong at the UN. You know, we're siding with a lot of the Islamist nations on many issues over the years.
Yeah.
And so I guess it will just give them a stronger case, I guess. But yeah, I would be deeply suspicious of anything that Mike Pompeo does. But when they want to rewrite the meaning of the Declaration of Independence, and we hear this propaganda so much already in this country, even to work against abortion rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think we're in for it. a lot of propaganda.
I mean, the two obvious goals are Christian supremacy and discrimination against minorities. That's the end game.
So, final question, and much to my delight, we actually have somebody tuning in from India. And so,
all right.
Shivashish Prarthi asks, and this is related to our work, can atheists be given asylum in the United States of America?
Well, does she mean atheists from abroad?
Yes, yes.
Well, and we haven't been successful in bringing in any Bangladeshi so-called blogger. And many of them are scientists and writers, but they all got bloggers who were targeted by Al Qaeda after Avijit Roy was killed.
Sure.
None of them have been there's no attempt to give them asylum. One, Rizal Ahmed, who we have honored at the Freedom from Religion Foundation
Convention,
who escaped Bangladesh when the co-founder of the first gay periodical was hacked to death there in 2016. He was brought in through gay rights groups.
Okay.
He was brought in as a persecuted gay, not as a persecuted atheist. And one man that we've been working with, who was stuck in Nepal with his children, he's just got asylum in Canada.
I see.
It's Germany, Europe, Canada.
So what are
the United States is not helping at all.
Yes.
The rules are incredibly dense and outside. But I mean, I think generally, my understanding is that it's theoretically possible, but under this administration, impossible.
But certainly from Bangladesh, and of course from the countries where there are bans, it's going to be impossible. And even the woman that the State Department brought in, that I went in and lobbied on behalf of, she had her. It's been 2 years now. She's just in limbo. Even with the State Department bringing her in, and she was targeted because she said she was an atheist and she didn't want to wear a hijab. So I guess she might be a case where she's an atheist seeking asylum. So very hard, and it's very distressing to see this situation is not going to get any better.
And if I may toot our own horn, we've been doing great work through non-belief relief in the past to try to get these persecuted freethinkers from all around the world, and especially South Asia and the Middle East, to the United States with, as you said, sort of mixed results.
Well, at least some of them we've been helping to go to other countries and so on. But you can't sustain people forever. So you really want to get them into a country that will accept them, and that's the problem.
Well, wonderful. That's all for the questions we have. We had some great questions today, touching on so many basic foundational documents, both in the United States and abroad. And well, thank you so much, Annie Laurie and Andrew. It was great to be on the show with you.
And we invite you to become a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation to help us in our very vital work to keep religion out of government and to keep educating the public about the views of us non-theists. You can visit our webpage at ffrf.org. You can also phone 1-800-335-4021 or just join us.
And one way you can help FFRF is by contacting government officials. If you want to receive FFRF action alerts right on your smartphone, text FFRF to 52886. That's the 4 letters FFRF to 52886.
Thank you for watching. We'll be taking a hiatus next week, but be sure to join us again on Wednesday, August 7th for our next episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.